Hello, Dr. O'Rourke. My name is John Dermeyer, and this is my gait development presentation. First off, lifetime motor development is exactly that. It starts with our whole life from conception all the way to death. And within life development, there is gait, which is our pattern of movement of the limbs during locomotion. And what I'm going to do throughout this presentation is gait analysis, which is the critical analysis or clinical analysis of walking. And the phases of gait consist of the stance phase, which have initial contact, loading response, mid stance, terminal stance, and pre-swing, or that's the swing. And the swing phase is pre-swing, initial swing, mid swing, and terminal swing. So it is imperative that development starts with prenatal health. And the embryonic and fetal stages, a mother needs to have an environment that's safe, and the development of a child and how they move throughout life can be dramatically changed during pregnancy. Abnormalities can occur depending on what a mother eats, or if they do drugs, or if their environment is stressful, or with things like someone putting pressure on their stomach could dramatically change how their baby moves throughout the rest of their life. And there's also genetic things. Overall growth is very important, and each person grows differently and will have genetic differences. And each body system also can be affected from genetics and physical constraints. But overall, the body needs to develop in order to be ready for the world. So in the starting of gait analysis, when a child is born, they don't just come out walking. There are motor milestones that need to be reached within the first year in order for a child to be properly moving. And these include visual milestones, with going from a young child or a newborn being able to see within 12 inches of their eye. Their sight happens within 12 inches, and progression to being able to move around and recognize their environment. There's also motor development, which is single joint movements and simple movements. Gross motor development, which is multi-joint movements and a little more complex movements. Things like a child kicking their legs is very important, and it helps them develop. There's also auditory, and this affects gait because balance is a huge thing, and the inner ear can, if a person can't hear, they actually don't have as great a balance, and that's something that needs to be recognized early. And then also, we all know that children like putting things in their mouth, and it helps them to understand their environment. And that's imperative for later on movement. And this chart shows a lot more specific motor milestones that need to be met in order for a child to be properly developing. So here's a video of a early development of a child in walking. And the gait analysis that I have done shows that he has a wide stance, which is common for his age group. He also has a multi-plane motion. He's unstable. His weight moves forward with his head, and his arms are up in a guarding position because he's afraid to fall. And constraints of early development can be environmental. For like a small child that doesn't have a play area or access to a sibling to play with. And then another common physical constraint is co-activation of segments. So their gait looks a little bit different because something like within the lower extremities having the co-activation of the quads and the hamstrings at the same time, which makes it so the segment doesn't move properly. Okay, now we move on to the development of gait in childhood. And this young girl will notice, wow, we actually have sound here. So the analysis that I've done on this girl is that her gait is inconsistent. She's definitely still young. I would guess that she's 2 or 3. And it's very sporadic. The length of her stride is never consistent. And the constraints that she could have are cultural, in that in our culture, girls are often limited on what kind of activities they are allowed to do. And this protection could cause damage in their sensory ability and proprioception. So that protection makes it so they can not develop and move as well as somebody that isn't protected as much. And then another physiological constraint that I put here is a specific gait pattern that is myopathic gait. And why I put this one is I had a friend that has muscular dystrophy, or had muscular dystrophy, and my mom picked up that his gait pattern was different when he was young. And myopathic gait causes a person to waddle, and it happens because of muscle weakness. And so his hips, my friend with muscular dystrophy, his hips would drop, and he would waddle because of his muscular dystrophy. So now we move on to adult gait. And in this video, it's much more consistent. There's a defined initial contact, loading response, mid stance, terminal stance, pre-swing, initial swing. Okay, so I'm ahead of myself. Initial contact, loading response, terminal stance, pre-swing, initial swing, mid-swing, and terminal swing. So important things that are consistent here are, like I said, is stride length. He shows uniplanar motion, which he's only moving on the sagittal plane. And some of the constraints for a person in adulthood is environmental. This is a huge one because of a sedentary work environment for so many people. They can develop shortened muscles in their hip flexors because they're sitting in hip flexion all day, and also back pain because they're compressing things like the piriformis muscle and get piriformis syndrome. And those are physical constraints that cause poor posture. And that actually in this video, you can see, well, I won't go to it because I'm running out of time, but he has a little bit of forward posture. I wouldn't call it kyphosis, but it could develop into kyphosis. So now in this video, this is an older woman, and because of her small steps, I came to the conclusion that I thought that she could have festinating gait or Parkinson's gait, because it is small, rapid steps are part of that particular abnormality. And the one thing that she did lack is tremors in her hands, but that could be something that just isn't shown in the video. And she also has the kyphosis and forward posture. So some constraints for an older population are physical would be osteoporosis, and that's obviously something that can be caused by a lack of calcium in the diet throughout life, and it can be overcome partially by lifting weights or having a load on the skeletal system and strengthening the muscles system. And then environmental constraints would be areas where an older person could fall, and that's the scariest thing for an older population, is falling and breaking bones, because for that age group you could die doing that. And there's multiple studies that have shown that walkers, including robotic walkers, can help with someone that has Parkinson's gait. So you can still thrive even though you have even though your age. And this is a picture of Julia Hawkins, the 103-year-old who runs the 100-meter dash. And this is my reference page, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation